This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. If there's one thing I hate more than realizing the world is slowly becoming more like Final Fantasy VII each waking day, it's the idea of someone or something always watching me. And the internet is full of that stuff: web limitations, surveillance, data mining, most being completely unaware of that fact. I'd rather get slapped around by a burly man. But thankfully with Surfshark VPN, you do have an easy one for all solution that's less painful too. Across many different products, Windows, Android, or Apple, with the click of a button, Surfshark turns you into an anonymous and hard to track user, giving you more freedom on the internet, keeps you away from prying eyes, and prevents companies from doing things like geo-blocking, where video and streaming services limit your library simply because of where you live. That's all non-issue with Surfshark though. You start out their service, you choose your location, you refresh the page, and there you go, your favorite show that you couldn't watch before. Like Sports Ball. Everyone loves Sports Ball. Go Sports Ball. And those that use the link in the description below and enter the special code Johnny will not only get 83% off their initial order, but the next 3 months are also completely free. As always, thanks to Surfshark VPN for the sponsor, and as always, thank you for helping support this channel. Now let's continue on with the show. Man, I gotta admit, I'm pretty nervous to head into this game. We're not just talking about another one of my favorite games of all time, but it's one of the most influential games, period. So many games will take inspiration from this, and it helped JRPGs take off on the West. I mean, finally, am I right? I don't think I can give this game proper justice or tell you guys anything new that you might already know. So you know what? I'm not gonna try and stress myself out. I'm just gonna tackle this like I do any other video and focus on what this game means more to me than what it might mean to others. Final Fantasy VII. Arguably the biggest game of 1997, my personal favorite of that year, and I don't know how many times I said this in this channel, 1997, that was a magical year for me, and a lot of other people, because if it wasn't on the PlayStation, the N64 had its share of juggernauts around this time: GoldenEye, Star Fox 64. Personally, I was partaking in a bunch of other PlayStation classics, like Tomb Raider 2, Crash Bandicoot 2, love me some Crash Bandicoot, but this game, oh, how I yearned for this, how I clamored to get my hands on this. It was not only the next Final Fantasy, and after playing and enjoying Final Fantasy 4 and 6 previously, I was like, yes please, more of this. But no, Final Fantasy was coming to the PlayStation. And then I said, Steve, you are forgiven for trading in my SNES. I thought for sure this game was going to get released for the Nintendo 64, the console I didn't have at the time. And originally that was the idea. Okay, actually Final Fantasy VII started life as a Super Nintendo game. But after wrapping up some emergency development for Chrono Trigger, the team behind the scenes decided to take a risk and start developing for the next generation. After creating a tech demo with Final Fantasy VI characters, demonstrating their capabilities with newly released 3D software at the time, the developers quickly realized they couldn't achieve what they truly wanted on cartridge-based hardware. For one, they couldn't get the game properly running on the Nintendo 64 without risking performance issues. And data compression back then wasn't as advanced then as it is now. Cartridges didn't have the same storage capacity as CD-ROMs. And it wasn't just a matter of space, but cartridges were also a hell of a lot more expensive to make and sell. So Square saw the shift to CD-ROMs not only as the logical next step, but also the best one financially speaking. The shift to the PlayStation would unfortunately cause a strain in Nintendo and Square's relationship for quite some time. It wasn't until, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on the GameCube where they finally made amends, in some way. But as for mainline Final Fantasy titles, I think even today, the last one that was originally exclusively made for a Nintendo console was Final Fantasy VI, back in 1994. Thanks to their previous successes, and with new hardware that allowed them to achieve what they had in mind, Square & Company had the means and capital to make a Final Fantasy that was a cut above the rest. Now, Final Fantasy VII's actual quality is of course subjective at the end of the day, but it cannot be denied that this upcoming title was one of the largest games Square has ever produced. I mean, its budget for marketing and development was gargantuan. The jewel case was doubled in size. It had 3 discs. It was the first multi-disc game I ever owned. I remember thinking it was like one of those double VHS cassettes like Martin Scorsese's Casino or James Cameron's Titanic. For the record, the only reason why the PlayStation Final Fantasies were multi-discs was because of the size and the amount of FMVs each disc contained. These took up a considerable amount of space back then, and I do have to wonder if the total cost of the multiple discs would still be less than the cartridge cost they originally rejected. The marketing for the game was next level. God, over here in America, the commercials for this game played all the damn time. I think that was one of the major reasons this game took off as hard as it did here. And I remember them only focusing on like the action-packed full motion videos. You check those commercials, you won't find an ounce of actual gameplay because it was the static active time battle shit. At a glance, you couldn't sell that to anyone here. It's funny looking back at that. The Western branch, when they saw the full motion videos, were like, oh fucking finally, something exciting to promote. Most of Final Fantasy VI's team will make the shift to this game, with some minor adjustments. Hironobu Sakaguchi still acting as producer, Yoshinori Kitase once again directing and writing, but now Tetsuya Nomura was not only a monster designer, but also lead character designer, replacing Yoshitaka Amano after 6 games. Though Amano would still contribute his fair share of promotional material during the game's marketing blitz. What the hell is that motorcycle for Cloud? This is jumping ahead here, but it's like if Kefka could transform into a vehicle like how the Shiva twins did in Final Fantasy XIII. What the fuck was that about? But yeah, Tetsuya Nomura, lead character designer. Now things are looking a little more anime than before. But this isn't his first rodeo. He designed Setzer and Shadow for Final Fantasy VI, and I have to wonder what Setzer did to earn those facial scars. But to repeat what I said in the Kingdom Hearts video, I personally find his human designs, much like Amano, to be a little samey after a bit, but regarding his original designs for Final Fantasy VII's roster, I love it. The burnt-like color shading, the etched lines, the general softness of the composition, like, this is way before his work got more shiny and rigid, and don't get me wrong, I also love that style, but I love this style more. It's not as harsh. It's like they were designed for a manga that never was. So, was there a Final Fantasy VII manga? I don't know. But this wasn't a traditionally two-dimensional design we're talking about here. Final Fantasy VII was jumping into 3D. And among everything else I'll cover for this video, this was obviously the most significant change compared to the other games. Overworld exploration being in 3D, battles being in 3D, besides menus and backgrounds, Final Fantasy VII was a 3D game with the biggest production values the series has seen so far. We'll cover more of that after the general plot summary, but I can say now, I think like the priority was increasing the quality of the game's presentation first, and then focusing on gameplay second. Again, we'll get into it, so why don't we just go ahead and summarize that plot now. And again, this is from my eyes, my perspective, my thoughts on it, and I don't want to go into like what theorists and philosophers have to say from all stretches of the land. It's just my video, so let's get the train ride started. Okay, let's cover the basics first. Deep within the planet, which I think is called Gaia, I don't know, lots of times it's just referred to as simply the planet, there exists the life stream, the general lifeblood of the planet. It's what keeps it going, and when things die, be they humans, animals, or plants otherwise, they return to the life stream and basically get recycled into something else. The circle of life thing from the Lion King, if you ever saw that. The mega corporation Shinra, originally a weapons manufacturer, eventually learned how to extract that very life from within the planet and process it to produce Mako energy, which is in time used to fuel everyday life, no different than standard electricity or fossil fuels. Yes, in the world of Final Fantasy VII, someone's dead relative could be powering your light fixture. Metaphor. Sorta. With Mako energy becoming incredibly profitable and in demand, mankind will be brought to a new age, something that wouldn't be that far removed from a realistically contemporary setting you'd see and live in right now, you know, minus the killer houses. Midgar, Shinra's metropolitan magnum opus where Mako energy powers everything. It's divided into 8 sectors, basically making it a giant metal pizza, with the rich living on the surface like a premium topping and the lower class living beneath the plates and slums like a cheap brand of great value dough. However, the constant use of Mako energy is coming at the expense of the planet itself, and realizing this, there exists a few in the slums who wish to stop Shinra from slowly killing the planet. These few are Avalanche, an eco-terrorist group led by Barret Wallace that will go to great lengths to stop Shinra from extracting the planet's life force. For their next mission, they hire mercenary Cloud Strife, a former member of Soldier, an elite squad of soldiers that are considered the best of the best in Shinra's fighting force. Together with Barret, Cloud infiltrates the Mako reactor in Sector 8 and blows up the Kingdom Come with a bomb. Joining them in their next mission is Tifa Lockhart, owner of the 7th Heaventh Bar in Sector 7 that also doubles as Avalanche's hideout. It's gotta be fucking hilarious if one of the bar patrons like accidentally triggers the hideout's secret entrance when all they want to do is play a game of Space Cadet. Being a childhood friend of Cloud reunited after so long, Tifa wishes to accompany him and keep a close eye, but unfortunately the mission is bungled when the president of Shinra himself puts a halt to their next attack, forcing the group to separate when the machine sent to kill them inadvertently explodes after battling it. Cloud plummets far below the reactor and remarkably survives the fall, crashing through a church roof and landing on a flower bed belonging to Aerith Gainsborough, a woman who spends her days selling flowers to the locals and someone Cloud initially meets during the Sector 8 aftermath. You can even call her the Slum Drunk if you're feeling especially dickish. Isn't that right, Slum Drunk? There's no time to chew the fat though, as Cloud needs to find a way to get back to Sector 7, and there's also the matter of these well-dressed folks known as the Turks constantly hounding Aerith, as the Shinra Corporation has much interest in her as the only surviving member of the Cetra, ancient inhabitants of the planet that could communicate with the planet itself. They were like granola to the extreme. The Shinra Corporation believe that the Cetra know of the location of the fabled Promised Land, where it's said that the planet's energy is at its most abundant. There they wish to build a new Midgar and probably continue what they're already doing here, because if there's one thing filthy rich corporations like besides money, is having more money. Cloud, with the help of Aerith, reunites with Tifa deep within Don Corneo's International House of Kings, cross-dressing as a woman to win Don Corneo's favor. It's great. There's a potential psychotic breakdown in a love hotel, a bunch of burly men sharing a hot tub together, a squatting competition to get a convincing wig, and partaking in Korean barbecue in a world where Korea isn't a thing. Knowing that Don Corneo is in Shinra's back pocket, the three threaten the pervert's nutsack to squeeze information out of him, where they then learn that Shinra, upon discovering that Avalanche is hiding away in Sector 7, plans on destroying the support pillar of the sector, causing the plate to crash down and kill everyone above and below. Jesus, all that just to wipe out a small-ass group of rebels. I think it would have been more cost-efficient if they just rigged that pinball machine to blow up. Alas, the gang is too late to stop Shinra from destroying the pillar, and Sector 7, along with Barrett's trusted squad, is crushed under the plate, and Aerith, in exchange for the safety of Barrett's daughter Marlene, is apprehended by the Turks and taken back to Shinra HQ. God, I just love this scene of the plate's destruction and the accompanying opera music playing in the background as President Shinra watches on what he's done. The main tower looming over in a victorious fashion really highlights just how soulless this bastard really is. A little one-dimensional and played out, sure, but he's far from the actual threat of this game. Cloud and the others agree to infiltrate Shinra HQ to rescue Aerith, gaining knowledge of her special talents thanks to her surrogate mother. Revealing her troubled past growing up with a deceased mom and the ability to communicate with the dead. We've all been there. After climbing up 59 flights of stairs because they have to keep things discreet, and I like seeing the gang slowly lose their minds as they climb higher and higher, Cloud and the others soon rescue Aerith from Professor Hojo, a scientist so grossly fascinated by the Cetra that he planned on having Aerith breed with another endangered species just to keep the bloodline alive for future study. That other endangered species, by the by, a fiery lab rat dog identified as Red 13, and just like that, Hojo became one of the most despicable villains of Final Fantasy with just a few short scenes. That's actually pretty fucking impressive. Red 13 in actuality is a highly intelligent being capable of speaking with humans and wishes to go back to his home located in Cosmo Canyon. So you bet the moment the stasis tube holding him and Aerith together opens up, thanks to Barrett's highly effective interference, he's quick to pounce Hojo for trying to make him start an OnlyFans nobody fucking asked for. Despite managing to rescue Aerith though, the gang is swiftly detained because, well, they're still kind of in the middle of a highly secured facility. But this is thankfully short-lived, as a mysterious entity begins murdering staff and security, leaving an eerie trail of blood all the way up to the president's main office, where the gang soon discovered that the president of Shinra has been killed by the long-thought deceased Sephiroth, once considered the greatest soldier to ever exist in Shinra. This doesn't spell the end of the corporation, much to Barrett's chagrin, as the president's son Rufus immediately takes command, wanting to control the world through fear rather than money like his dad did. He's even got a barrier dog, probably after realizing, okay, dad got the sword in the back, I ain't risking that shit. Well, Cloud fends off the shotgun-wielding, helicopter-riding pretty boy while the rest of the gang make their escape in the confusion, with Cloud eventually leading the charge in a motorcycle that happened to be on display. Man, it's a good thing these display vehicles are still functional and had gas in the tanks. With Midgar far in the distance, Cloud realizes that there are much bigger things to worry about now that Sephiroth is confirmed to be alive. In a flashback, Cloud goes into Sephiroth's immense power, where he could just shrug off any attack and lay on the damage tenfold of the younger Cloud facing the floor like, "Good job, team!" One day, during a mission to check on a Mako reactor close to Nibelheim, Cloud's hometown, Sephiroth began to have an existential crisis after taking a moment to reflect on how he came to this world after seeing one of Hojo's experiments escape a stasis tube in a fit of pain. Wondering if he was created in a similar manner given his abnormal abilities, Sephiroth spends the next few days locked in a nearby Shinra mansion looking up research notes from respected Shinra scientists, and coming to the conclusion that everyone would have made if they self-diagnosed themselves on WebMD. He is the chosen one, the end result of the Genova project, Genova being an entity discovered some time ago that was mistakenly believed to be a Cetra from over 2,000 years ago, when in actuality Genova is a malevolent extraterrestrial that wanted nothing but the planet's destruction before moving on to the next like a parasite. Oops! In the coming years, the idea of injecting Genova cells into humans to create a hybrid human and Cetra was considered thanks to Oh No Hojo here, and the first candidate was Sephiroth, injected with cells as early as a fetus. Being told that his long-deceased mother's name was Genova, Sephiroth believes his mom and the ancient Genova being kept sealed in the nearby Mako reactor are one and the same, and wants to fulfill his legacy as the last remaining Cetra by taking the planet back and becoming a god. In reality, no, that's not the case. Sephiroth's actual mom is this woman here named Lucrezia that carried Sephiroth for 9 months, but Hojo wouldn't want you knowing that, and the fact that he's the one who inseminated Lucrezia to begin with. And yeah, I said inseminated because I'm sorry, I find it hard to believe that anybody, no matter how much they love science and all that shit, would ever find Hojo fuckable.
As you, my dear, Ifalna was elegance, right down to her cellular structure.
But this whole thing always made me pity Sephiroth. A man born with incredible powers thanks to the power of Jenova's cells, but because he was lied to since an early age about his true nature thanks to Hojo, he doesn't take it well and eventually loses his mind. It's frustrating thinking back about how much of this game's plot could have been avoided if therapists exist, because I think if someone just had to sit down with Sephiroth after he had that initial panic attack and made him realize, the nature of his existence is not what defines him, I think he could have held his ground and keep it steady. But nope, he goes full sicko mode and burns Nibelheim to the ground in a tragic, yet iconic shot of him walking into the flames. I always love that shit. Cloud's exact details over his confrontation with Sephiroth are hazy to say the least, and he can't recall how he managed to survive at all, but what's important now is that Sephiroth is back, and he's looking to make life miserable for everyone on the planet by obtaining the black materia and using its power to summon Meteor to cause damage so cataclysmic that the energy required for the planet to heal the injury would be massive. Sephiroth would then be front and center to receive that energy and become a god with that newfound power. So now a good chunk of the game is the gang tailing Sephiroth across the planet as they learn more about his plans involving Jenova and the Black Materia, encountering Shinra and their goons along the way occasionally, and having multiple run-ins with the Turks. I love the Turks. I love their theme, I love the way they dress, the way they present themselves. My favorite of the bunch being Rude. Yeah, his name is Rude. A man of little words and would rather just get things over with and punch you in the face. Ow. After the Midgar section, Shinra's significance does fade pretty significantly. They become more of an ass sword than a serious game-changing threat. It's quite striking how Sephiroth's sudden appearance hijacks the game's narrative from a corporation doing evil things to a single being threatening global chaos. But I think the overall foundation of the plot is still simple. Shinra bad, Sephiroth bad, save the world. But not only is that a grossly oversimplification of what is otherwise an incredibly layered game, that's not why you play. It's all about the characters and what I think is the game's biggest quality. And thankfully there isn't 14 of these fuckers compared to last time. But Final Fantasy VII, like Final Fantasy VI, is a tremendously character-driven narrative. The cast of Final Fantasy VII remains one of my favorites in the series because of the amount of time and attention that's spent going into who they are as individuals, with details both explicit and subtle that make them relatable or complements the game's themes. And maybe it's because the writers were no longer restricted as they were with the cartridge space or Nintendo's strict censoring policies, or maybe it's because the cast isn't as large as before, so there's more room to focus on those that are here. But there are a lot of little things you can learn about these guys that in summation give them a kind of depth that wasn't possible in earlier games. I love that everyone here and who you eventually recruit has been affected by Shinra's corporate bullshit in some form or fashion. From the get-go, it creates an underlying connection between these characters, giving them common ground to establish bonds and maybe flesh out their personalities, each also coming with personal baggage they gotta spend time unpacking and getting proper resolution for. And to go deep into each character would honestly blow this video hard for what's supposed to be a general look back, because at that point, fuck man, I might as well just do a damn 2-hour-long documentary on the game's themes and messages, and I just don't have the time for that. And that's never been what these videos are all about. But to give an example, I'll use Barret Wallace, one of my favorites. Barret's massive hate boner for everything Shinra stems from an incident years ago where his hometown Koro was burned to the ground when Shinra believed the citizens destroyed the Mako reactor nearby. He lost his family, he lost a good friend, and it cost him his arm, which he later got a gun grafted on, and I gotta wonder if he ever has to reload that son of a bitch. His mission involving Avalanche and claiming to stick it to Shinra for the sake of the planet is true in some fashion, but in reality he's mainly using it as a means to get revenge on the company that took everything away from him. But what I love about this is, so later on during the trip into the Gold Saucer, the game's amusement park basically, you find some of the staff and Shinra guards gunned down in cold blood, and the head of the place thinks it's Barret because it couldn't be Sephiroth. Sephiroth doesn't use a gun. But if he did, do you think it'd be as long as his sword? Anyway, the gang are arrested and sent to Coral Prison, which is like the remnants of Barret's old hometown. There is discovered that Barret's old friend Dyne, who Barret believed died all those years back, is still alive and also got a gun for an arm. Must be a regional thing. But he's the one who actually murdered those folks in the Gold Saucer. After losing everything near and dear to him, Dyne's mind is broken and just wants everything and everyone to die. He is a dark reflection of Barret, one that has become so consumed with grief and vengeance that he loses his sense of being to the point of self-destruction. Like, he commits suicide after having a tussle with Barret and finding out his daughter is still alive, making him realize how far he's fallen. That daughter, by the by, being Marlene. Gotta wonder how the little baby survived that fire. She must have had the proper accessory equipped. I like to think that after this whole thing, Barret realizes how lucky he's got it with his companions, and from this point he mellows out. Sure, after this his significance peters out, and it's like this for a lot of the cast. They get their major arc, and after the resolution, they're along for the ride for added flavor text. But still, the resolution adds more to the character that sticks through to the very end. Barret's still a loud Mr. T knockoff that wants to stop Shinra, but after his arc he's actually doing it more for the planet and Marlene's sake now, becoming considerably less selfish than the very corporation he's trying to take down. And I think this kind of subtle, layered writing can be applied to almost every character. I say almost because some are not as lucky, like they're still good, but not as good if you ask me. There's this sentient robot you meet later called, okay, I know it looks like Kate Sith, but it's actually Ketchi, it's Gaelic. Yeah, I hate it too, but it's important to respect other cultures. Anyway, this thing is actually being remote controlled by the Shinra executive named Reeve, who was in charge of Midgar's urban development sector. And while initially he was sent to spy on the heroes, he later joins their cause to stick it to Shinra. And it's like, okay, the basis is there. He's probably seen time and time again how miserable the people of the slums have been treated by Shinra and wants to give back. But I don't think enough is done with him to give him proper development and closure. At least not yet. I think I recall the sequel games doing something more with the character. I'll have to wait and see on that later. Oh, fuck me, I'm talking about the other characters, aren't I? Okay, fuck it. Go for broke. Some characters also don't get as much attention given their nature as optional party members, like Yuffie and Vincent. But they're not Umaro and Gogo bad from Final Fantasy VI. No, they get their moments, it just doesn't have the same kind of significance or impact. Yuffie, the materia-loving ninja girl who's ashamed that her homeland of Wutai has become a tourist attraction after they lost a great war with Shinra. And then there's Vincent, who really should have had more relevance given his former history as a Turk, his hatred towards Hojo, and the fact that it's him that reveals Sephiroth's true mother. He would later get his own game, Dirge of Cerberus, on the PlayStation 2 that attempts to rectify his lesser presence here. Attempts to, anyway. But we can save that for later. Some of you were asking me about my plans concerning the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, and believe me, I want to get into that at some point. I even want to talk about the sequel movie, Advent Children, but that ain't gonna be for a long time, like a long fucking time. I feel Red 13's character growth isn't as much as the others, but he serves as a means for the game to flesh out the planet itself. Yeah, I'm somewhat half serious, the planet itself can be considered a character in this game. Even makes a screaming noise when it's in pain. I actually hated that noise as a kid, it was very unsettling. For the most part, Red is just the talking lion that accompanies the party until you eventually reach Cosmo Canyon, his homeland. And the only reason we stick around is because our vehicle we get from the Gold Saucer breaks down as we pass by. Can't have shit in Gaia. So I guess while we're here, thanks to Red's grandfather Bugenhagen, we learn about the nature of the planet, the life stream, basically how the planet functions. It's to help supplement the spiritual themes of the game's narrative. Its importance not immediately relevant, but has payoff later down the road. And then we fight ghosts in a cave deep down below, and Red 13 reconciles with his long-deceased father who turned to stone after defending his people. When I was a kid, I thought the father's tears coming down from the statue were like materia because they made the same noises they do. And I was like, Red, what are you doing, baby? That's free materia, dude. Grab it while it's hot. You meet this game's version of Sid later on, and here he's a loud, abrasive, and disgruntled pilot that got blue-balled earlier in his life because his dreams of space travel were dashed when he had to cancel the shuttle launch in the last second in order to save this girl named Shara, who was committed to checking the shuttle's oxygen tanks even seconds before the fucking countdown completed and was willing to accept her death like it was nothing. And at that point, okay, I gotta question the girl's sense of self-preservation. Like, what was her life beforehand to be comfortable with just throwing it all away like that? But Shara would stick around with Sid afterwards because he saved her life, and she feels she owes him everything. But Sid, oh my god, he treats Shara like fucking shit. Like, this Sid ain't the foxy grandpa of Final Fantasy IV or Banana Man from the last game. This Sid is a borderline unlikable verbal abuser that's stuck in the past, and you get it. Like, deep down, a part of you understands. Imagine if the one thing you dreamt for doing your entire life is suddenly taken away. You'd be upset too. I fucking wouldn't take it out on someone else like Sid does here, but I understand the frustration. This is a much more grounded Sid, pardon the pun. A shining example of the game's story showing that, not every character will be a shining paragon to society. He, along with the citizens of Midgar and a couple of other characters, demonstrates that this game's planet is filled with all walks of life, and sometimes it gets uncomfortable. Shit, there's a moment where Tifa, at least in the first release anyway, I'm not sure if this was edited out, during the hilarious climb up the Shinra HQ stairs, she'll just straight up call Barret a retard for being whiny. And nowadays, that's a word that's shunned, and as someone who used the word liberally in his youth, I agree that it just needs to be dropped. But in a strange way, I hope I'm making sense here, it helps paint a picture of VII's world to help make you appreciate the good while also recognizing this world has its murkier parts too. And I think it can help you understand who these guys are. When the topic of a contemporary RPG is brought up, Earthbound is often mentioned, in my circle anyway, but Final Fantasy VII will always be my de facto example of a contemporary RPG. The modern cyberpunk setting helps with that, sure, but its stories and its themes, they just get better with age and become more and more relatable. Sadly, in a world that's slowly becoming more about mega companies buying other mega companies, climate change becoming more of a hot button issue than ever before, I don't think we have to worry about an alien parasite wanting to spread its influence and cripple our planet for no fucking reason. Oh, wait a minute! Yeah, you have the classic save the world spill, and that's what I liked about the game playing it as a kid. But as an adult, it's the themes, it's the subtext that really makes Final Fantasy VII like timeless. I love talking about it with other friends that enjoyed the game for reasons of their own, or maybe talk about what they didn't like about the game. It's all just a fun conversation that I feel Final Fantasy VII helped spark more than a lot of other games that I played in my lifetime. At multiple points of this narrative, I wish I could just enter the world myself and give these characters a big old hug. I said it earlier, but I gotta say it again. I really wonder how different some characters would turn out if they had a fucking therapist event towards. God, especially Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith. Cloud has one of the nastiest identity crises I've ever seen a major character go through in an RPG. I'm talking from my personal experience. I'm sure there are other characters in other games that got it worse. This ain't about those characters. Anyway, Cloud has a cool demeanor about him. No nonsense, but no stranger to getting involved in some of the game's kookier antics, whether he likes it or not. And sometimes he just comes off as a huge, lovable dork. But through the game, things don't add up when he recalls certain events, and you realize he's skimming on the details, intentionally or otherwise, concerning his reasons for joining Soldier and working for Shinra. And then you find out later that after the Sephiroth incident, the dude was basically comatose, left for dead, and experimented on being injected with Genova cells thanks to, you guessed it, oh no, it's Hojo. After witnessing his buddy Zack die while trying to get him to safety, Zack being an actual first-class soldier, Cloud's fragile psyche effectively made him take Zack's personality as his own and made himself believe that everything Zack went through, he went through. And later on when Sephiroth starts to gaslight and mentally fuck with Cloud, which he does so maliciously thanks to being able to control the Genova cells in Cloud's body, Cloud gets put through the mental ringer so goddamn hard that he is eventually wheelchair bound and out of commission for a sizable chunk of the game's second disc. Adding to this is Tifa, martial artist extraordinaire and as of 2022, Italy's new prime minister. Being from the same town as Cloud growing up, she was subject to the same horrors he saw when everything was burned to the ground. She would also lose her father to Sephiroth's onslaught. This likely traumatized her, of course, compounded by the loss of her mother a few years prior to this. But now, years later, she finally gets to reunite with Cloud, and she quickly realizes that Cloud's recollection of past events doesn't completely add up. But she's so damn reserved in bringing it up herself because she's afraid of hurting Cloud in his fragile mental state. And she knows Cloud is in a fragile mental state given flashbacks we see later concerning how they reunited in Sector 7. But because it also probably hurts just thinking about those painful memories herself, she was content with letting Cloud continue to pretend just so she can keep him close, simultaneously acting as a friend and I guess getting a coping mechanism out of the whole thing, given their similar circumstances. I love Tifa as a character. I always keep her in my party when I can. It helps that she's the game's monk, and that just reminds me of Sabin from the last game, also one of my favorite characters there if you recall. It's also the reason why I hate that fucking slapping match to get into with Scarlet later, a Shinra employee. Like, Scarlet's a bitch, absolutely deserving of what she gets, but Tifa's a martial artist. Fucking suplex the shit out of this woman. What are you doing trading happy slaps? Kick the shit out of her. What is this shit? In the gold saucer date, I always make sure it's her that goes out with Cloud, because I think it just makes the most sense. I know the game tries to tip it towards Aerith, and the dynamic between Cloud and Aerith is cute, but I think it has a snag. It's implied that Aerith sees her former boyfriend in Cloud, that person being Zack, small world, but since we later find out Cloud was putting on a mask to hide from traumatic experience, in hindsight, her flirty nature towards Cloud makes me wonder how much of Aerith's fondness for him was because of who he really was, or because of who he reminded her of. Now, to be fair, if Aerith is the chosen date, she does admit that she wished Cloud opened up more to get to know the real him, so I have little doubt her feelings would be genuine. Aerith's just a good-natured sweetheart despite her rough upbringing, though she's got a devious side to her that I love too. Growing up in the slums of Midgar, Aerith learned the ins and outs of that rough street life, but she still cares deeply for those she loves, but also knows how to take advantage of chumps that try to make advances on her. One of my favorite examples stemming from this are the flowers she sells. If she likes you or senses good things about you, she only charges you a gill for them, but later when you're visiting the Honeybee Inn, the love hotel I mentioned, you find out that Lecha's outside trying to woo her spend like 300 to 500 gil on a single flower. And again, I love that about Aerith. She is probably the most important character of the roster given the nature of her existence and her eventual role. Being the last remaining Cetra, and I mean like an actual Cetra, none of that imitation Genova brand, Aerith feels it's her responsibility to stop Sephiroth from achieving his goal of using the black materia to summon Meteor. Since childhood, Aerith has been in possession of the white materia passed down to her from her biological mom. With it, she can summon Holy, the counterbalance to Meteor. But her independent nature she developed in her years in the slums unfortunately gets her into trouble at points, and eventually, after deciding to take on Sephiroth alone, attempting to spare her friends the burden, it tragically leads to her death, getting stabbed in the back by Sephiroth's sword. No blood though, so might have believed the Cetra are made of air? Aerith's death is like the worst kept secret of Final Fantasy VII. It's something everybody knows, even if they never played the game. And in 1997, when I first got to this point, it was certainly a striking moment, but I gotta say not nearly as impactful or devastating as tragic moments in earlier games. Like Celeste's attempt at suicide, that shook me. I think a part of the reason why Aerith's death is mentioned so often is because for a lot of folks, Final Fantasy VII was their first Final Fantasy. Over in Europe, that was certainly the case, if we're not including Mystic Quest. Final Fantasy VII was the first Final Fantasy they got, and you know what they say, you always remember your first time, even if it involves the death of a beloved character. But I don't know. Maybe it's because I played the other Final Fantasy games, but Aerith's death was never like the end-all be-all saddest tragic moment in the franchise's history. And I don't know. Am I a monster? I just don't. I just think there are other impactful moments in earlier games that hit a little harder. But don't get me wrong, it's still a tragic moment, and I really feel for Cloud because this happens when he's starting to get mentally destroyed by Sephiroth's influence, and earlier, during their venture through the Temple of the Ancients while on the hunt for Sephiroth, Cloud inadvertently beat Aerith up in a panic after Sephiroth forced him to deliver the black materia found inside the temple. Not only is Cloud still mentally processing that whole thing, that same girl just lost her life to the very dude that mentally tortured him. Again, Cloud is just destroyed throughout this game. But I think it's what gives his eventual means of discovery that more of an impact. So later, Cloud manages to deliver the black materia to the real Sephiroth located in the northern crater, because you see, the Sephiroth we've been following through the journey are just pieces of Jenova that are acting as Sephiroth's avatar. The real Sephiroth, thanks to Cloud, was sent to his doom during the Nibelheim incident years prior, thrown into the Mako ravine below like Palpatine was in the Death Star. But this wouldn't kill him because he's that much of a badass. He managed to keep his consciousness alive in the livestream, and from there, slowly manipulated those that had Jenova cells injected into them, with the eventual goal being to reunite those poor saps up in the northern crater with the black materia, as that is where Sephiroth's physical body remains. After Cloud fulfilled Sephiroth's dastardly purpose, the dude was basically left to die, and later, when you find him comatose in an offshore village, he and Tifa get sucked into the livestream after an attack from the ultimate weapon, one of the planet's natural defense mechanisms that awaken when the planet is in danger. The planet ain't fucking around, what the fuck? Within the livestream, Tifa somehow enters Cloud's subconsciousness and from there helps him put the pieces back together. What really happened during the Nibelheim incident, how Sephiroth disappeared, and Cloud coming to grips on who he really is, a man down on his luck that tried to join Shinra's soldier program to impress Tifa in his youth, but couldn't make it past being a basic-ass Shinra grunt and felt ashamed because of that. Still, his courage, his sense of right and wrong could not be contested, because as Sephiroth went apeshit and burned the village down, he would take Zack's huge-ass Buster Sword and stab Sephiroth in the back. Sephiroth probably be like, oh fuck, I'll remember this technique for later, you little prick! Through sheer determination, Cloud managed to send Sephiroth packing like I said earlier, but the grave injuries on top of the trauma he just experienced left him vulnerable to Hojo's experiments, and he would later get injected with Jenova cells and essentially kickstart Cloud's mental train ride from hell, not helping that Cloud witnessed Zack die when he was recovering from said experiment. But after accepting who he is and with Tifa's support, Cloud finally tackles his inner demons and returns back to the planet with some degree of normalcy. I don't think you just magically get better that fast if you ask me, but that little stretch that Cloud does after explaining a situation to his friends in the airship got, I love that so much because you know now a major weight has been lifted from Cloud's shoulders, and we, along with his companions, helped him along the way. God, I said I wasn't going to spend time on all these characters, and I ended up spending time on all these characters. I can't help it, I fucking love this cast, man. Even if some don't have as much significance as others, their personalities and company help complement the bigger picture. One thing I love that this game has over Final Fantasy VI, if you remember how I said that story's dialogue came across as generic as the game's method of covering every possible party configuration, that's not the case with Final Fantasy VII, likely thanks to the better hardware. On top of this party traveling pretty much everywhere together, so there's plenty of moments where they take the time to reflect on the situation as a group. Even when you split them up for the time, every character has unique dialogue for a particular moment, and I love it because, yeah, that encourages replayability, and that's always a good thing in my books, but it also helps flesh out some smaller details for specific party members, of which I can't possibly cover all of them. Play the damn game for yourself at that point. But it is where Cloud finally accepts himself, where I feel we're on the path to the finale, and we might as well be, because there is this subplot that plays out when Shinra is trying to gather huge materia to fuel a rocket and crash it into Meteor and blow it to pieces. But for some reason the gang want to stop Shinra from doing that, and I never got that. It just makes the whole thing feel like a needless filler. I know they hate Shinra, and sure, Shinra deserves it, but Meteor is just bad news for everyone, so why not let them make the attempt? I don't see you guys doing anything, and your last attempt is sleeping with the fishes, so what else are you gonna do now? The rocket doesn't work. Take that, science. And eventually Shinra ends up biting the big one when President Rufus seemingly dies from a weapon attack, and the gang finally kill Hojo when he attempts to help Sephiroth with Midgar's large fucking cannon. Our climax sees our heroes entering the northern crater to face off against Sephiroth and Jenova one last time, and together they manage to win the battle, but Cloud gets the glory kill where he confronts the remnants of Sephiroth's will from within his mind and gives him a glorious Omni Slash. Or you can sit by, do nothing, and let Sephiroth attack you, where Cloud would then save the day with a wimpy-ass counter. Sephiroth is finished, but Meteor is still heading for the planet. But thanks to the gang's actions, Holy is able to escape its confinement and deal with the smoking rock, or so the gang think, because it turns out Holy isn't actually working as intended. Fuck, it's past its expiration date. But then the planet itself, probably wondering, hey, what the fuck happened to my weapons, takes the stage and fends off Meteor using the life stream, because in the end, Mother Nature always wins. The last thing we see before the credits is Aerith's face. And I'm serious, the game just ends after that. There is one more scene in the post-credits where we skip 500 years into the future to show Red 13 and his offspring traveling towards the lost wreckage of Midgar. And okay, obviously, the biggest takeaway is that life moves on, but it also sort of double dips into the nature prevailing message that just happened minutes prior with the live stream. It feels a little redundant. I won't lie, it's a bit anticlimactic. It's like Mother 3 before Mother 3 was even a thing. But I think it helps that most characters at this point already have proper resolutions to their personal endeavors, and by the time everyone agrees to travel to the Northern Crater to take on Sephiroth, everyone's content with the possibility that they may not make it back or that killing Sephiroth will actually fix anything. It's all or nothing, and if it's nothing, well, they tried. It helps cement what I think is the true nature of the story, where again, it's not the circumstance surrounding the characters, it's about the characters themselves. And as I spent the last century and a half talking about in this video, I think this game does that really well concerning all these guys and gals. And there wasn't a mention of a crystal or a warrior of light in the slightest, which was going to take out the writing staple of Yoshinori Kitase, or maybe it was something mandated by Square, down with crystals, up with motorcycles. The soundtrack, I cannot stress this enough, does so well in enhancing the scenario. Basically, just take everything I said about 6's soundtrack in the last video and times it by 10. I was 10 years old when I played this, my mind a sponge to whatever was on the TV, and my god, the dynamic nature of the soundtrack put me in so many moods, and I can't possibly name all my favorites considering I love the entire fucking thing. Legit, it's hard for me to name a track I don't like here. As early as the game's intro, you have the opening FMV that leads into the bombing mission sequence. I love this track to death. Under the Rotting Pizza made me feel like I was in a spy movie with that sexy bass line delivering that extra crunchy synth. The Forbidden City, where you travel into the City of the Ancients. Oh my god, it is so foreboding. It's the last thing you hear before Aerith's death scene, and you just know something's about to happen. You don't know what, but something is about to happen, and I'll never forget how gripping that felt back then. It was like my very soul was shivering. The character themes are among the best in the franchise, my favorites being Tifa and Barret's. I hope that isn't too strange of a pairing, but they're what I immediately gravitate towards. I think their songs are the perfect encapsulation of what they represent, though the other character themes are still damn great. One Winged Angel, the final boss track, and I clearly remember this, it made my jaw drop because, oh, Latin choir, we got lyrics. I don't understand what they're saying, but we got lyrics, and I was so enthralled. The theme beforehand, Birth of a God against Sephiroth's first form, fuck man, I love that shit too. All the battle themes are so good. The normal one, the boss theme, Genova's theme. Fuck me, man. Final Fantasy VII is one of Nobuo Uematsu's best works. It's one of my favorite soundtracks of Final Fantasy and of all time across mediums. And there are other soundtracks in the series I love for similar reasons. I mean, my god, I can't wait to talk about 9, 10, 14. Final Fantasy VII score, to my ears, covers all bases and does it with flying colors. If you end up not playing this game, listen to the music still. I think even without context, it works. But yeah, the first Final Fantasy to go 3D. And to go back to something I said earlier, this is where most of the focus went into developing this game. And me being such a graphics whore in my youth, going from Final Fantasy VI to this game was such a dramatic leap, holy shit. Though mechanically very similar to the Super Nintendo games, battles were now in 3D, characters going from their dinky overworld models with Popeye arms to realistically proportioned fighters that moved in all sorts of ways for regular attacks, spell animations, status effects. I love how confused characters just spin in place, like trophies on display that can suddenly end things with an ultimate spell. Fuck me, man. Limit breaks were introduced here, where after taking enough damage, a character could unleash a super attack that could devastate enemies or give them a nasty status effect in Aerith's case. Final Fantasy VI actually predates the concept with the Desperation attack, but these were something you only had a chance at seeing whenever a character was in near-death status, and given how easy that game was on top of the random nature of all this, it was unlikely you were seeing these attacks at all. Limit breaks were great as equalizers, and a great way for me to complete the game when I didn't fully understand the materia system growing up. They were a simple mechanic for my pea-sized brain. Rainbow meter does big number attack, big number good. One time, I got so infatuated with learning new limit breaks that I had Cloud's level 3 limit break, Meteor Rain, before the Rufus fight, and that's only like 6-7 hours into the game. I'm stupid. I was fucking stupid back then, but it did take an ungodly amount of time. And this was back on original hardware too, so no speed up feature on emulators or any of that shit. The materia system though, the defining mechanic of Final Fantasy VII without a doubt. Multicolored orbs dense with the knowledge of the ancients. Essentially, it's how you get magic and other abilities in this game, but this goes far beyond the magic side of the last game. Materia is tied to practically everything in this game. Black and white magic, supportive skills, blue magic giving weapons and armor added effects like elemental properties, elemental defenses, attacking all enemies at once, attacking one enemy 4 times, with materia getting stronger as you complete more battles with them equipped. Characters in this game, besides limit breaks, don't have anything that sets them apart besides some, in my opinion, negligible stat differences that might make them slightly better in either physical or magical attacks. A character is truly defined by the materia you decide to give them, only limited to the number of slots available in a character's weapon or armor slot. This allows you to make any character anything you want. With proper materia, any character can become the mage, or any character can become a hard-hitting tank, a long-range fighter. It's up to you. And materia growth is tied to the materia itself and not the character, unlike how Magicite worked previously. So if you want to give Cloud or Vincent access to strong magic later on in an instant, you can slap that materia you leveled up earlier, and that's that. And some of these materia, I mean, it's just not fair. Enemy skill has to be the best example. With this equip, you can learn certain enemy attacks like blue mages did in the other games. And if you know where to look, if you know what to manipulate, some skills are just busted as shit, giving you access to strong as hell magic as early as your first overworld venture. Don't need no stinking Chocobo to avoid that Midgar Zulum now, man. I want that beta skill early, and oh, fuck, I did it again. Considering the love I have for these characters thanks to the story, I couldn't appreciate more how this was set up, because the thing I didn't like from 6 was, despite enjoying some characters, if they didn't have a natural ability worth a damn, there was no point in having them in my party that I couldn't easily fulfill with another character, and given how everything was tied to magic, who better to use than the natural magic users? It was that matter of efficiency I mentioned. Here, I don't feel so restricted in who I bring because everything is tied to materia. Without that, these characters are practically blank slates. The character limit was reduced to 3 though. It's not the end of the world. Again, the materia system makes up for the smaller roster, but Christ, we went from 4 to 5 to 4 again, and now we're at 3. What the fuck? Materia gives me damn near complete control of everything, and one of the best things about it is finding nifty combinations to find different ways to win fights. Give Cloud a materia combination that causes his attacks to inflict status effects that can shut even the most annoying enemies down. Manipulate your HP value so that you can trigger the game's hidden Lucky 7 mechanic, where your character will go berserk, attack 64 times in a row for quadruple 7 damage. The 2 super bosses Emerald and Ruby weapon giving you trouble. With a proper combination of materia, you can make it so that you can counter each attack with a Knights of the Round summon that only costs MP 1 time and fully restores your health after each summoning. Just cast it once and 20 minutes later, the fight is yours because these animations are so long and these bosses have so much fucking health. God, I want to like these guys more, but their enormous HP pools make them so tiring to fight no matter the means. I can cook a meal with how long this shit takes to go down. Jesus. Summons, they got all the cinematic love because now they would get like a full 15 to 20 seconds of screen time to do their dedicated attack, and some were pretty damn MP intensive, but the damage they dished out more than made up for it. Knights of the Round, to mention that again, one of the late game summons you can acquire, reigning supreme with its near minute-and-a-half long animation. This is to the series' benefit and detriment, where the upgraded presentation created a potential speed bump in the battle's flow. The series was making that generational leap with new technology, a new dimension, so a lot of effort was placed in making battles feel like action pieces from a movie or a TV show. But unfortunately, this doesn't always work because battles can now be easily drawn out with overly long animations and repeatable encounters. Summons were one thing, but some encounters for no reason had really fucking long and drawn out normal attacks. Like these douchebags in Midgar subway tunnel. Oh Christ, never have I ever wanted to run away from something so fast because holy shit, I just want to get a move on. Why are their attacks so goddamn long? The icicles in Gaia's Cliff, you have to beat them in battle to make them fall and then use them as platforms, but every time you do, the game feels the need to give the icicle a unique, stretched out death animation where the icicle begins to crack. The first time, this ain't a bad thing. 4 times in a row, Sephiroth's Supernova attack is a 2-minute long animation. They can't even kill you with gravity-based damage. That shit is just hilarious. But it's something you don't want to watch more than once because you got other shit to do. These complaints echo the same I had for Pokemon, where the shift to 3D, going from the Game Boy games to something like Stadium and the GameCube stuff, just caused everything to be drawn out. What was normally a 15-second encounter was now close to a minute long, depending on how the battle proceeds. But nowadays, this isn't such a big deal because re-releases included a speed-up function. For that alone, I recommend getting the game that way. You'd be surprised how much time that could save. Though towns and dungeons use pre-rendered backgrounds and objects, the overworld was completely 3D, giving VII's world, despite its smaller than average size I think, a great sense of scope. You can travel with a top-down camera like the old games, or shift the camera to behind Cloud and take in the sights as Cloud sees them. run around in circles like an idiot during a grinding session, or get lost in the Wutai Mountain area because this place fucking blows. Whether high in the sky in the airship or down below in the ocean depths with the submarine where you got this asshole lurking around the corner when you least expect it making me shit bricks, exploring the world in 3D was an immersive experience unlike what I experienced before. Movement has not aged gracefully. It also does not help that this is a 3D game that was originally designed and released before the analog stick was officially implemented on the PlayStation, and even with the game's later release overseas, it still wasn't added, so you gotta use the D-pad and stiff 8-directional movement in a game that is no stranger to claustrophobic town design where it's hard to maneuver around things sometimes. And then there's the problem of the hidden or obscure entrances and exits given the pre-rendered backgrounds. People bitched about this so much that for the international release, they added these red and green cursors to show players things they could enter and climb. There's even a spot in the trek through Mount Coral where the plot important shed is highlighted complete with a sweat emoji, like the developers were apologizing. I pity the original Japanese players when this wasn't a thing because I can't imagine how much time was spent lollygagging because of unclear pathways. There are also some dungeons I never miss. The haunted caverns of the G-Tribe below Cosmo Canyon, everything about Mount Nibelheim. It's so winding and stretched out on top of the high encounter rate. That's what makes most of these places a pain in the ass. It's the random encounters. After a bit, it starts to grate on your nerves, and it's not as if battles are hard to run away from, but it feeds into my problem with the upgraded presentation, how battles take longer to complete and get going, because now you got this graphical whoosh every time a battle starts that has to load the area, and those seconds start to add up. It gets exhausting after a bit. Dungeons don't last a particularly long time in this game though. I can only recall 2 or 3 that are about as long as the most treacherous places in the older games. No, most areas in this game are only about a handful of screens, and the structure of the story and how it affects your overall progression is about as linear as I want to say Final Fantasy IV. You are given some degree of freedom in a couple of points, but most times you can't venture too far off because of current circumstances, or because your next destination is never that far off. And that sort of puts a damper on otherwise traditional elements like chocobos. Before, hitching a ride on these was as simple as going to a stable or forest and saying giddy up. But in this game, you need to not only have the proper materia to even encounter these horse birds on tracks you can find scattered across the world, and that itself is random. So frustratingly random. But you also need to capture them by making them the last thing standing in battle. It's a process you have to go so out of your way for just to ride these things that it's inconvenient. They put so many tracks around the world that I think they expected players to do this regularly, but I'm like, no, the time I spend trying to catch one of these guys, I could just easily spend reaching my destination on foot, random battles included. No, the most memorable thing about chocobos in this game is chocobo racing and breeding. Yeah, getting chocobos to fuck. You get a sample of racing one time during the story to get you introduced to it, and if it tickled your fancy, you can raise your own chocobos in the stable and get them fighting fit for the racetracks and the gold saucer for prizes and material you otherwise couldn't get. Under special conditions, you can even breed special chocobo that can travel in different terrain like rivers, mountains, and even the endless oceans where hidden treasure awaits. That aspect is something I always loved about chocobo breeding, exploring the unknown, because not everything is marked on the map, and it was thrilling thinking about where I can go next and that no territory was off limits. The actual process of chocobo breeding itself, though, without knowing the tricks of the trade and manipulating the game's RNG, it's a time and money sink. Finding the right chocobos to capture, making sure they're the proper gender, giving them the appropriate nut when breeding, and then praying after a romantic night out or a few romantic nights out, the offspring produced is the desired result. If not, time to reset or do some random battles to reset a counter and try again. So much time wasted, so much money burned back in the day, but I love actually getting the gold chocobo. It's the best of the bunch that can travel anywhere, and after feeding it enough greens, they smoke the competition in chocobo racing, even in the higher classes. It's pathetic. Nicely done, dumbass. Minigames though, this game is packed with them, acting as either a break from the main action, like the G-Bike sequence complete with low poly Cloud and his giant low poly razor blade, snowboarding down fresh powder, doing flip tricks and other shit, destroying a Moogle's house and then watch him flip a fucking table at you. That dude is pissed. Or you got this submarine game you need to play once before you unlock the submarine for travel, which shouldn't be a problem. It's the most fucking brain dead thing I've ever experienced in Final Fantasy. As soon as it starts, you can just mash the fire button and you win the mission in less than 10 seconds. Not even the other levels you can play later on are any more of a challenge. It's such a very odd minigame. Fort Condor, a game of tower defense, and it's required one time, but I'll tell you now, I never bothered playing this game as intended, placing fighters across the board, because to me, it's much easier to just let the boss reach the shed and initiate a battle, because then I can fight the boss with my party and kill them no problem. Playing the game as intended, spending your money, strategically placing fighters and booby traps to get the jump on the different types of enemies heading your way, it's a money sink, it takes too long, and not worth the items you can nab. You do it to say you did it, and get Yuffie's super happy fun ball. Other games merely act as a distraction, much like Chocobo racing, and are located in the Gold Saucer, the game's amusement park. I often don't spend time on these unless I'm really bored. The Speed Square rail shooter is fun for a bit. I feel like I'm on drugs going through this with all the things I can shoot in the bright colors. The arm wrestling is just button mashing, the 3D arena is just rock, paper, scissors, and who the hell is that tall, dark, and handsome? Jim Kelly from Enter the Dragon? Battle Arena, I did spend a lot of time here, where you do a set number of battles with an increasing handicap to get more points. There's a couple of items of materia you can only get here, some being incredibly powerful, so yeah, it was enticing. I hate that you can encounter this fucking ghost ship though, because he could be one of the last encounters you face, and he has an attack where he just ejects you from the fight, and you don't get anything. You just fucking lose right then and there, and when that happens, I lose my shit. No! 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 Damn you, ghost ship! I hate you, ghost ship! Ah! Son of a bitch! Son of a goddamn bitch! Until Final Fantasy XIV entered my life. Final Fantasy VII was the one I put the most playtime in throughout the past 2 decades or so, I want to say. It was one of the longest mainline games so far. I clocked close to 30 hours from my playthrough. Beforehand, games would never go over 20, if they even reach that far, including side content. My first couple of playthroughs back then, though, were about like double the size of that, because this was the time before I became internet savvy. I had to discover a lot of shit on my own, and when I wasn't doing that, I would rely on physical strategy guides. I had 2 of them. I had the Brady Games Guide, which was okay. It spoiled the plot unapologetically, though, and it had its share of typos and misinformation. The best one was the one from Versus Books, and I thought I had mine to show off for this video, but I left it back in Philly. So Mark, if you're watching this, give it back. This was a book I liked reading even when I wasn't playing the game. It had a ton of great doodles across different pages. It was comprehensive as fuck, listing materia, weapons, and limit breaks. It didn't spoil plot details ahead of time, and this poster, love this poster so much. Reading this alongside playing the game, Final Fantasy VII in my youth was a magical time. This is all I needed back then, and for a while it was all I played. I became a Final Fantasy VII addict, and in my downtime, I remember this. I used to doodle the characters. I used to whip out my sketchbook and then just draw characters in my downtime. I loved drawing Cloud back in the day. It was his baggy pants and spiky hair, and I'm weird like that. The story kept me coming back for more. Maybe this time I use this kind of materia. Maybe I actually go out of my way to learn different limit breaks for other characters if I decide to use them. Maybe I'll actually do the Wu-Tai stuff with Yuffie, because fuck that whole side quest otherwise. She steals your materia and you're naked for a good part of the quest, and it's like, no, fuck you, that ain't fun, that's dull. Sure, Final Fantasy VII is one of the most influential games ever made. It put JRPGs on the map and all that, but I never cared about that. That never mattered to me, because I was already a Final Fantasy fan when I first played it. When I got the game for Christmas in 1997, I had a freak out like that N64 kid, but it wasn't because, oh my god, it's the next major PlayStation blockbuster that critics are saying is the second coming of Christ. It's because, nah man, it's the next Final Fantasy. And I can't say if I'm qualified to determine if this makes a good jumping point for a newbie because of that bias. But if it helps, I do have several friends who weren't convinced with the earlier games, but loved playing Final Fantasy VII, so the materia system might seem a little overwhelming given the freedom at your fingertips, but with a little time and patience, I think you can easily work it out. And man, if you pick this up, I hope you enjoy yourself as much as I do. Graphically, it's aged, and the story might be a little much at first glance, but it keeps you hooked through its characters, its themes. You just want to keep coming back for more, and it's the right length too, in my opinion, so it never gets tiring, even after all these years. As for the remake, since I know some of you were asking me about that, I'm not touching that until it's finished. God knows how long that'll be from now, but this is more of a personal preference. I don't want to fully get into the game until I have the complete context of the entire story. Again, I don't know how long that'll be, but while we're waiting for that, I could at one point or another get into the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, but not now. God no, no, there are still other mainline Final Fantasies I want to eventually get into. It just, that might be a whole other marathon itself, if I'm being real, because there's a lot to cover in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. But as of now, I'm pooped from Final Fantasy, but the next time we reconvene with the series, it'll be with Final Fantasy VIII, and I will wait then and there to get into my history with that game, because yeah. Well, thank you again for joining me in my return to the Final Fantasy series, and as you can see, they're getting a lot longer now. These games are getting larger, the productions are getting larger, the videos in suit are going to get larger, and I got to say, these videos, I love these games, but these videos were a hell of exhausting to make. I gave this one to Lewis, and thank you, Lewis, again, if you're watching. You don't have a choice. You're actually watching this right now. Hey, Lewis. Hi. Thank you again for helping me take the editing duties for this one, and I don't know. I gotta tell you, like, one of the reasons why I'm taking a break now is because the idea is like doing all this in a row is just So I'm going to go back to Resident Evil for the time, and then afterwards, I'm going to go back into fulfilling the promises I made in that direct video a couple of months back. So I hope you guys will look forward to that. As always, thank you all for watching. Stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask if you decide to go outside, get vaccinated if it's possible. Have yourselves a fantastic night, and take care.